role of government in a large part is to protect itself and society from risk.
Yep.
Your position of power is dependent upon some sort of corruption of the system. You're never going to adopt this. There really is no room for error whatsoever.
If there's all these benefits that can come from a digital voting system and the blockchain providing that sense of trust, why aren't governments taking it up?
Welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole, your easy-to-understand podcast on the blockchain and beyond. My name is Tim Lee, and thank you so much for joining me in this journey into the ever-evolving and sometimes elusive world of the blockchain. In this episode, I'll be talking to Nathan Spataro, co-founder of Secure.vote. With the US midterms having been completed, there has been some highly publicised political rhetoric about fraudulent voting. Is this real? Can blockchain technology solve this problem? And what about other countries where dictators cloud voting in secrecy, where there is a genuine fear about declaring who you voted for? Can this all be resolved using blockchain technology? Let's find out as we head down the rabbit hole. Nothing in the Down the Rabbit Hole podcast should be considered as investment or legal advice. The blockchain and cryptocurrency markets globally are unregulated, high risk, and constantly changing. You're advised to seek professional guidance before contemplating any opportunities within the blockchain and cryptocurrency space.
Well, today on Down the Rabbit Hole, I'm really pleased to welcome Nathan Spataro, who is the co-founder of the Flux Party, which is a non-partisan political party in Australia.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
Yeah.
And also Secure.vote, the co-founder of Secure.vote, that's developed a blockchain-based system for voting. And given what's been happening most recently in the United States with a lot of generic talk about fraud, voting fraud and that type of thing, it made it very relevant for us to have a chat. So maybe what I'll do is just get Nathan to give all of us an idea about his background, what got him into the Flux Party, a bit of detail who the Flux Party are, and just what drove you to do Secure.vote. So do you want to just give us a quick idea of your background?
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. And thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
That's awesome. Well, it's great. Thank you for sparing time to come.
No, absolutely. So I guess, my journey, where do we begin? My, first introduction to this whole world, this rabbit hole, if you will, my start to the rabbit hole was I think back in 2013, I believe it was the Cyprus economic crisis.
When it was the bank run.
That's right. There's a bank run. It caused price of Bitcoin to begin to spike, and I was a big fan of Max Kaiser, anti-banker guy at the time, who I actually had the good fortune of meeting in Miami earlier this year. I got introduced to this idea of Bitcoin on one of his shows. And the moment I understood what Bitcoin was, it was after that was a waterfall. I just went straight into it. I tried to buy it as soon as I could, and I became obsessed with everything Bitcoin pretty quickly. It was through that I met my co-founder in both of these projects, Max K. Max had been in the crypto world for quite a bit longer than me, actually. Max is Australia's first Ethereum developer. He's actually named on the original post by Vitalik Buterin as a contributor in the early days of Ethereum. So he and I met through the Bitcoin, it was the Sydney Bitcoin meetup. That was when Max had been thinking about this idea for a political party that would use tech as a way to give people direct access into Parliament in some way. Actually, at the time, it was more of an idea. It was more based around how you could have minor parties cooperate. Okay. Obviously, in Australia, getting political power as a minor party is quite difficult. But more and more minor political parties are actually representing a larger and larger voice, but the actual process of getting elected is not always so easy. Okay. So if there were a way to somehow share, say, the capacities of one senator for a lot of minor parties that have very disparate issues and don't necessarily conflict in a lot of cases, that might be a useful thing to do. So that was where we started, but obviously the idea became much broader as our ideas became sort of more refined, and we put more effort into sort of understanding the direction we were heading in, and it became really a platform for every single Australian to be able to contribute to the political process. So in 2015, we started working earnestly on the Flux Party, developing how it would work, how we were going to register the party, eventually get elected, and in 2016, we contested the federal election. We ran 2 Senate candidates in every single state, as well as 1 candidate in the ACT. So that was really the sort of the launch of, I guess, our journey into this. But it was at around that time that we identified that there was a gap in the technology world that meant that the things that we wanted to do with Flux, there wasn't enough technology to basically provide that. There was no secure and reliable platform for online voting that would allow us to do that. And this really comes from that question. People say to you, well, you're going to run this political party and you're going to have people voting and you're going to trust them. How are they going to trust you? And, the answer really was, well, they can't trust us, right? So, and they shouldn't have to. There should be a tech solution. So fortunately, with Max's background in blockchain and as a software engineer, we sort of set about architecting a solution that would solve that problem. And we quickly realized that solution would also have big implications for existing political systems and voting and democracy. And that was the start of Secure.vote as well. We decided to start a company and build the tech in a way that would benefit not just what we were doing with Flux, but also democracy at large.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Now, just because we're going to be talking about voting fraud, which is a big issue at the moment, because we're very conscious that we don't want to get into a lot of political narrative, I think just so we can just put a bit of integrity on the table, so to speak. The Flux Party is a non-partisan party from what you're saying, and it's working with other parties. So from what you're saying, is that my correct understanding?
Yeah, that was definitely, the first part of that is true. Insofar as the way we work with other parties, it's changed a bit since we started the movement, I guess. Our vision was that it would become a vehicle for other parties, and I suspect it still will be. But one of the things that we found pretty quickly is that the realm of politics itself is full of people who, how do I put this diplomatically? People are in politics for specifically their own agenda and can often be very narrow-sighted insofar as it's concerned. We found it very difficult to actually organize effectively around the way that we wanted to work. So we suspect that certainly other political parties will work through us, but not necessarily that they'll, at least in the short term, collaborate with us. But you're right in saying that this is a non-partisan movement. We're not taking a left or right position whatsoever. Okay. We leave it to the people.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I guess the key narrative that's been coming out of the US since the midterm elections has been this topic of voter fraud. Now, whether the commentary on that from all parties is right or wrong, and whether it's politically charged is right or wrong is a different question. I think really the narrative I'd like to really sort of start exploring is about how do we look at the issue of voter fraud and how does the technology enable us to overcome that? Because you guys run Secure.vote, right? So, and I remember when we were on a panel back in March 2017 or so, that you said that you had arranged 1.4 billion transactions, or 1.4 billion votes to be counted in a day. Do you want to just talk through a bit of that narrative then, in terms of how Secure.vote can, as a platform, can help stop the potential of voter fraud?
I'd love to. So you're referring to a stress test that we ran last year that, the purpose of that really was to demonstrate what could be done using a platform like the one we're developing. And of course, that wasn't, a full test of the suite that we intend to build, but just of a part of that and just to see what the throughput might be in terms of things like signature verifications. Yeah, it was close to 1.5 billion votes in a 24-hour period. I think the entire test, which ran a little longer than 24 hours, reached 1.6 billion votes.
Right.
And that was really limited only by Australia's internet speeds. We think it could do several times more than that with, say, European internet speeds. The purpose of that was really to kind of wow people into saying, well, this is what's possible with technology. And, when it comes to voting, it's an area that really hasn't seen any major innovation in a very long time. When you've still got places running, paper ballots that are marked with pens and then run through vote counting machines, this is quite an old way we think to do something like this. And the reality is there is tech that's been able to do a lot of this stuff for a very long time or to solve some of these problems for a very long time, but they've been obstructed by the fact that people have serious security concerns.
Okay.
So you can have a system that, provides, say, ensures that only one voter can log in and create one vote. Okay, that might be one part of your solution. And you might have a solution that is able to tell you how many votes came in a lot quicker. But trying to do those things and also provide things like voter anonymity or true secret ballot, and also preventing that catastrophe that can occur with things like hacking, or also, like we saw with the census overload of the systems and DDoS attacks. Those are some of the problems that have taken longer to resolve. And unless you have the entire suite of those things, then trusting your democracy to them is just not viable.
So are we asking with Secure.vote to trust voting via code? Are we saying trust the code?
Well, I guess in part we're saying trust the code. We're saying trust mathematics. You and I trust that when we take our next step on a flat floor, we're not going to fall through it, right? Just because of that's, we've worked out that's how it works. Pretty reliable. In the same way, mathematics has proven to be incredibly reliable. And we can apply that kind of rigor that we, use to build skyscrapers to tech.
Yeah.
And when you have technical systems that are able to withstand that kind of rigor, then you actually can get to what we call trustlessness, which is, in essence, what blockchain is at the core of. It's sort of trustlessness. And that's what we're trying to apply to the tech. Right now, the voting systems, there's an incredible amount of trust you place at many, many levels in the voting system. You place in the tech, in tech that's not nearly as sound in a lot of cases as the stuff we're trying to propose, and in humans at many, many steps through the process. And I think for people looking in on that, that's where we start to run up with these problems, is the impact it has on humans and their trust in their democracies.
So is Secure Vote then a decentralized structure in the truest sense of the word, so that almost the government doesn't control it? It's controlled by the community, almost like Bitcoin in that sort of sense. Is that the way your vision is, or is it?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's controlled by, so from a technical point of view, it's not controlled by the community, but as it is distributed, it does operate in a fashion such that there is no sort of central source of truth like there are in typical data architectures that enable someone to go in and manipulate it.
Yeah.
So presently, a lot of online voting systems do rely on some central source. It's being altered in some way by an authority that has the right to make to alter that database. And Secure Vote takes a very different tack, and it actually, in many ways, it does restrict the power of the facilitators insofar as, we run into this. You can't change a vote, okay? If you're using Secure Vote, you're the facilitator, you're the commission who's running the vote. You can't change a vote. Once the vote goes in, you just can't change it.
So I go into the platform, sort of via my mobile phone or via my desktop, whatever it is. I vote for Nathan Spataro for the Flux Party.
Yeah.
And once that vote is cast, that is cast in stone. That is it. It's done, dusted. I've got no chance of actually trying to change my vote.
Yeah, so there are ways that we can architect it such that you might be able to change your vote. For instance, if you want to have a voting time that is longer than, say, the day of the vote, there are ways to do it. But essentially, once the vote is cast, that is, say, it leaves your device and enters the network that we engineer to manage all of this, there's no way for you to change it. There's no way for the electoral officials to change it. And part of that has to do with our anonymization algorithm, something that we've developed a patent for, we've made a patent application for, and it's a way of ensuring that we can take a known list of voters and completely disambiguate that known voter, that authorized voter, from their vote, such that no state actor or hacker alike could interfere with that in any way.
Right, so they couldn't see, potentially in say, difficult regimes. I mean, if we looked at, someone like Zimbabwe or other areas of the world that have challenges, is probably the best way of saying it, that those state actors couldn't actually see who you actually voted for.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, we think that's really important. I mean, there are certain democracies, even liberal democracies, that don't necessarily hold that as valuable as, say, we do in Australia. I mean, it's a really core tenet of Australian democracy. But we think this is really important, actually. And I think especially when you've got digital systems, it becomes almost even more important, because if you're then having a system that might be vulnerable to some kind of attack or are easier to access in certain regards, then you're potentially putting people in danger, voters in danger. And we don't think that's really acceptable for any.
And I guess one of the things that it gets over, if you have a trusted digital form of voting, whatever that might be. I mean, Secure Vote obviously has got some very, very strong narratives there. I guess all of a sudden you no longer have the polling stations. You no longer have the people that you have to actually, to get things organised, to actually bring all the booths and all that sort of stuff. All that infrastructure just disappears overnight.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Right? So from a cost point of view, it makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and also in a lot of ways we're lucky here, right? Like, and I some people will tell me I'm wrong on this, but I think it's good that we have a culture where people mostly get out and vote, and obviously it's legislated that we do.
Well, if you don't get fined,
you do get fined.
Or something,
That's right, and I think it's not a radical fine or anything like that, but it's enough to sort of encourage people to go and do it. And I think that's really important, that we all take some role in our democracy. But look, we think that if you've got a system that lets you vote in your PJs on your couch, on polling day rather than having to climb out of bed. I mean, particularly in the places like the United States where they really do have a problem with voter turnout. I mean, half the battle in the USA is just getting your constituents to go out and vote.
Well, that's it. I mean, as all this narrative's been building in the States, I mean, I've been sort of hearing stuff and on the CNN and other stations, whatever, where they talk about a lot of the African American community vote on a Sunday because they go to church and then they vote. Mm-hmm. And in certain states, they ban people voting on Sundays as a sort of a means of trying to stop that vote happening.
Yeah.
So you suddenly think, what the heck is going on here? Why can't we just, as you say, vote in your Jim Jams?
Yes.
With your Vegemite and your pet rabbit on your lap or something.
Yeah, I think that's how we ought to be doing. I mean, if you look at technology, the whole point of tech is to make the things that we do and need to do easier and better experiences for us. And I don't think, and democracy should be, I mean, obviously there's a lot of rigor that comes with this stuff and it's important, but at the same time, if we can do things that make, participating easier and more enjoyable in some ways to do, and also potentially think about the numbers of people that go to the polling place and actually don't know who they're voting for until they get there. They're actually quite staggering. And I'm going to butcher this up, but I mean, it's as much as 20%, I think, in some cases more people who just sort of get there and they got an idea, but they don't really know. And then they sort of see who gives them a pamphlet, they have a read in the line and they go and vote, right? So I think we'd all agree that it's probably better for people to be paying more attention to that. Yeah. I don't think you could argue with that point. If you can have people voting from a place of relative comfort where they're not trying to get in and out. And I mean, it's a shame that we sort of even have to, design systems like this, but it's the reality of the world we live in, right? If you can build a system that lets people actually, I'm in front of my laptop, I can actually sit here and take half an hour to maybe go and look at some policies and have a bit of a think about this, that's got to be better too, right? Whereas a lot of people are just trying to get in there and do it because it's an obligation, and aren't really taking it seriously. So if we can make it easier for people to be in a state of comfort to actually go and do that, I think that's good too. So, I mean, the benefits we think for moving to a system like this are just so many. You mentioned the cost, but that's just one of many. Yeah.
I mean, there are so many benefits. I mean, the amount of paper that's printed, the amount
huge.
Of manual labor that's used to actually count the votes, and all these things. I mean, I suppose the big question that comes to mind, if there's all these benefits that can come from a digital voting system and the blockchain providing that sense of trust, why aren't governments taking it up?
Well, I mean, it comes down to risk at the end of the day. I mean, the role of government in a large part is to protect itself and society from risk.
Yep.
And if you're approaching government with a very novel solution, a very innovative solution that is a real departure from what they've known, you really can't expect too much. You really can't expect them to sort of jump in, with both hands and say, let's embrace this. Like, a company might, private entity that's trying to stay competitive in the market and looking for an edge. Government doesn't have that on their shoulders, right? Government can take the time and be as slow as they want to.
Isn't there a sort of a mechanism when you think of lean startup methodology, right? In terms of startups, the way they work, there's an MVP, a minimum viable product, and you sample test it with small pilots and that type of thing. Are there not limited areas that the government could say, you know what, this has got some merit. Why don't we try it with that particular project? Whatever that particular project might be. I mean, have you had that sort of narrative?
Yeah, look, it depends on where you go and who you speak to. We've had, at the end of the day, these things require resources. Even sort of low friction tests and trials and things that require resources from some department somewhere.
Yeah.
And again, you've got to get buy-in. In a lot of cases, you've got to get buy-in from a lot of different parts of an governmental organisation.
Right.
So it's not without its challenges. It's not to say that it's not possible. I definitely do think that those things are on the horizon with this technology, and we're certainly pushing for that actively. But there are other challenges too. I mean, one of the big ones is legislative. So, for instance, in Australia, the Commonwealth Electoral Act is very clear that pencil and paper voting is the way that we do elections.
Right.
So, then there's a political component there, right? So in addition to interfacing with the bureaucratic side, you've actually also got to go to the politicians, and now you have to have a legislative change. So that's, the case in a lot of places. So yeah, there are a number of challenges, I think, when looking in the government world with getting this going, though I do think it's inevitable. It's just really a matter of time.
But it's really interesting because I've been talking to various people on this podcast series, and it's been a real eye-opener, some of the things I'm discovering. That, for example, with different countries are all at the different early stage adoption of this sort of tech, and some are adopting it faster than others. And, it's one of those things that Australia, because we're only 25 million people, it's not as if we're Brazil at 220 million, the States at 325 million, whatever it might be. There's got to be a way in which we can actually be a bit more nimble on our feet and more innovative. Because if you look at, places like Dubai, Estonia, Lithuania, even Singapore.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, they're smaller economies and smaller countries, but they're committed to adopting this tech. I mean, I was speaking at a conference in Dubai last year, and they're committed by 2021 to having all their government processes onto the blockchain.
Yeah.
Right? So now, Dubai, I don't think is necessarily a true democracy, I guess, in the true sense of the word, from what I know. But I mean, places like Estonia or Lithuania, would they not adopt this sort of thing?
Yeah, look,
they're 3-4 million people, the size of Sydney or Melbourne, for example, as a capital city. So you can mitigate a lot of the risk and then be a showcase for the rest of the world. I mean, Estonia and obviously Secure.vote.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Places like those are definitely, part of our roadmap insofar as where we need to go to get some traction. I mean, I definitely think that those sort of smaller nations are far more nimble than...
And Malta as well. Malta's just come right into the center of the blockchain space, and they're only 400,000 people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it pays, in some respects. I mean, and that's sort of the edge that these smaller states have, right? When it comes to adopting certain innovative paths forward, there's a lot less resistance, both bureaucratically and socially, to be able to move ahead with innovative ideas. And especially because they, in a global market, they need that edge, right? When you're a small competitor, you've got to take every advantage that you can. And in some ways, it's sort of almost more capitalist in that sense, where you do feel that pressure from the market, whereas larger countries like Australia don't. I think the big challenge that we've particularly got in this market is that democracy is one of those things. It's really a pillar. It's a huge pillar, actually, of society, that there really is no room for error whatsoever. Yeah. And as we're seeing, as mentioned before, in the United States, I mean, when you run into challenges with voting and the conduct of democracy itself, that's like existential. That's where society just does not accept failure, especially in advanced democracies like ours. And so I do definitely see more opportunity in places like the ones that you've described in Australia, certainly at this point with the legislative challenges.
Or would there be, for example, I don't know, sort of voting in shareholder votes or something like that? Or something which is contained and can be controlled, and the methodology be tested and that sort of thing. I mean, is that something that's on your radar?
Yeah, look, it definitely is. I think the thing for us in that space is that, we're definitely looking more to partner with other organizations, other companies that provide those kinds of services, which there already are. And specifically because our niche here really is that voting side of it. Yeah. And with certain systems like, let's say, shareholder meetings, there is a whole suite of other tools that you would want to build into a software solution like that, right? Of course, video conferencing stuff, chat things, there's a variety of things that would come with that. So for us as a, early stage company focusing specifically on this deep tech, let's say, in that voting realm, that's sort of where we're looking. So we definitely see a potential there, but the tech there would really we're looking for partners, I guess, in that realm for us to work with and really embed what we know is the best voting tech with the best in practice for other solutions that make a more full software solution for those kinds of markets.
Right. And do you think that the voters are ready for a digital version?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I mean, you and I've got. There's a couple of years difference in age between you and I. So millennials, I get it. They'll sort of say, yeah, absolutely, I get it. I'm used to my mobile phone. When I came out of the womb, there was a mobile phone.
Yeah, pretty much.
My birth was sponsored by Apple or something. I don't know, but it's millennials are used to that sort of narrative. But are you going to teach your grandmother how to vote via a mobile phone? Is your mum going to vote via a mobile phone? I mean, there's all those sorts of narratives that one has to look at.
Yes.
And is it the human issue that's stopping this type of thing going through?
I don't think that it is. I think that if you look, I mean, my nana, she still goes down to the bank when she needs to get cash, right? She hasn't got a card. And, she's savvy. She gets out and about. She's still... it's not like she's someone who's had trouble in her older age at all, but just from a technological point of view, she just doesn't want to do it.
So, right? So what you're saying is your nan goes down to the bank and then she goes to the Bitcoin exchange to buy some Bitcoin.
Yeah, precisely.
To the Bitcoin ATM to actually buy some Bitcoin, and then she trades. Is that what
she does? Day trading on ICOs.
Of course.
No, but I mean, the thing I think to realize here is that there is always going to be a generation of people in society that is lagging behind the technological pace of society, and especially, of course, and that's inevitable. So I don't think that that's the barrier. I think that we need to move ahead with technology in spite of that. I mean, the government does that now. I mean, you jump onto your MyGov and there's a whole bunch of resources that you can use that I'm sure, a big chunk of the population is not taking advantage of.
Yeah.
And I think that's perfectly okay. It just comes down to, the pace at which we roll them out.
Yeah.
But, I think, hopefully get the numbers right, but Australia Post did some research last year into digital voting and the sort of the future of internet-based voting. And I think they found something like in their studies, 82% of people said that they'd be comfortable using an online system to do voting. Right. So that's obviously, we want to see it a lot higher than that, obviously, to get to that point. But we've got the makings of a society that really is ready to transition to that. We use so many things online. I mean, I'm wearing a watch that if I want to, I could do banking from. So yeah, it certainly makes sense. I don't think that's a barrier, or at least not a significant barrier. And there are also ways that we can marry, the old and the new in the meantime, so that we're not disenfranchising people who do want to participate.
But also the thing is just sort of coming to mind as we're talking, when you look at difficult regimes, let's just call them difficult regimes that perhaps might be considered to be corrupt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to use this in diplomatic terms for obvious reasons, but if you try to implement a digital voting system that defines truth, the people at the top who are corrupt are going to be exposed and they're going to lose all the vested interest they've got. So what's the incentive for them to actually get involved?
Well, I mean, for those kinds of regimes, there really isn't one. I mean, if your position of power is dependent upon some sort of corruption of the system, you're never going to adopt this. But that is, I mean, the existence of something like this, though, is awesome insofar as the pressure it places on those kinds of regimes, right? So, I'm really fond of democracy, which should be clear from all the things that I'm doing. And if you look at society, if you look at the liberal democracies, like Australia, our standard of living is really bloody good. Yeah. And anywhere we have free and open societies that are defined, usually by a democratic system of government, those societies tend to do really well as compared to, autocracies that have dictators at the top of them, with a couple of exceptions. But for the most part, liberal democracy works really, really well. And the existence of liberal democracies in the world should be, and has been, in many cases, encouraged other people to adopt these systems, right? If you've got a system that works really well and delivers good results for the people, the other, people in countries who are not as fortunate to have those kinds of systems say, well, why can't we also have that? So I think that using systems that are good and demonstrate positive results for a people will put pressure on on states that don't endorse those practices, and because their people will eventually want them. I mean, all major political change happens in, basically one of two ways. One, either the people really want to make a change and some sort of soft or hard revolution occurs, or some big political power from outside comes in and tears things apart. And we've seen that historically with empire building, like the United States is prone to do. But we want to see, people making that sort of soft change from inside by incrementally implementing solutions that open up their societies and make them.
I mean, it's interesting. I was talking with a South African crypto podcast earlier this week, and we were talking about some of the corrupt regimes that exist in Africa and the challenges associated with that. And I mean, I guess it could be the situation that the big third parties like the IMF and the World Bank who support developing countries could actually say, if they loved your technology that much in terms of democracy, they could say, okay, we're going to give you this next tranche of money, but the conditions associated with it are you adopt a blockchain-based structure like Secure.vote.
Yes, yeah. I suspect, those organizations are very good at strong-arming states and doing what they want. So, I suspect that in some cases that is how it will operate. Though, yeah, when you're talking about the base of power, in a lot of ways, I think it's got to come from within to some degree. You've really got to have people on the inside that support those kinds of things. As we've seen, when it comes to giving up power, if you're one of those, autarchs, it's not, you're going to find ways to get around that if you can.
Of course, I know, absolutely.
So, but I'm obviously of the opinion that anything that is making democracy more transparent and reliable and trustworthy is a good thing, and provided we're not using violence as a means to instantiate them, anything that encourages people to adopt them is a good thing too.
Yeah. So what's the next steps for Secure.vote then? Where are you at? Are you funded or are you self-funded?
Yeah, so we have raised some capital to date from, we've had some private investors. Yep. Mostly we've had no sort of institutional investment or VC funding to date. Really the next step, we've really identified that to be sort of successful, our product is particularly powerful at that top level. And, you mentioned before some alternative markets that we can go into, and they're all absolutely there, and we definitely see potential there. But insofar as competitiveness, Secure.vote's product really is about mass election. We're talking about running millions of votes through a system and providing that scale and security. It's worth mentioning that our Trust No One secret ballot is the only one of its kind that we're aware of, which is why we went down the patent route.
Yeah.
So, this is really important technology. So for us...
Especially in difficult countries, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Where you can say, okay, I voted and I know that tomorrow the Stasi isn't coming to take me away and put me,
Right.
So we see that really as being where we need to head and the direction we need to head. But, obviously as an early stage company, interfacing with government at that level is obviously not without its challenges. So for us, we're really looking for, I think the next stage for us is really looking at multinational sort of global partners that have the resources and the connections to help us actually go to that level, rather than the typical startup route, which is start small, go into the little tiny market and start here. And,
But I guess you've actually got proven tech to a degree with that 1.4 billion votes being counted in a day. Obviously things have moved on from there. I appreciate that. It just strikes me that this makes sense.
Oh, yeah. It makes perfect sense.
Common sense. Now, I know sometimes government doesn't react to common sense, but it just makes sense.
Yeah, look, it does.
Commercially, politically, ethically, from a whole variety of different standpoints.
Yeah. One of the awesome ways to think about this that I like to is think about good tech should make us forget about things that we used to worry about. Okay, and if you think about so many things that we take for granted now, I don't even need to, you can just, there's no point in me even giving examples because literally everything in this room has done that, right? And with voting, with democracy, it's the same thing. And Secure Vote, the tech that we're building is going to be one of those things. We should get to a point where we just take it for granted that the electoral process is as perfect as we can make it, essentially. The things being experienced in Florida now are a thing of the distant past that we imagine, God, you remember when they used to have recounts? You remember when went...
I think it'll be, do you remember we used to actually vote with the paper?
That's exactly right.
You can hear that sort of conversation happening in the future.
Precisely. And the amount of energy that these kinds of phenomenon drain from the social psyche and the worry that it places on the political system, it's just, it ought to be a thing of the past. And we're at a point now where the tech that we're developing, we know will do that. It's now just sort of incumbent upon us and other players in this sort of space to make a case for that tech and really drive it.
So, key question then. How long is it before, say, any country in the world will vote digitally? And how long before Australia votes digitally? And how long before the States votes digitally?
Oof. Okay. Well,
right. Okay. I'll put you on the spot there.
Well, the answer to the first question is we've already got that. So Estonia do have digital voting already. They've got a digital ID card that makes it very easy for them as well when you've got digital ID systems. So they're really ahead of the curve.
Have they got a blockchain-based voting system?
No, they don't have a blockchain-based system.
They need to talk.
They do.
So and if anyone from Estonia here, you need to look at Secure.vote. Go on.
We'd love to hear from you, Estonia. Insofar as really mass online voting, look, it's hard to say. One of the challenges is that you do have a group of academics in this space that are very, very resistant to internet-based voting. And anytime... There's a couple in Australia whose names I forget, and also in the US. There are folks from the United States who literally do tours of countries every time the discussion of internet voting comes up, and will hop out in the media and say, don't do it, it's a disaster, and things like that. So there is actually a contingent of people opposed to this tech.
Who's driving that then? That smells of...
Yeah, I forgot.
It smells of money driving.
No, look, it does in some ways, but I have to assume positive intent that these people generally are people in the space of cryptography who maybe don't understand some of the newer solutions coming out. Really cutting edge solutions. And, historically, internet-based voting systems have been, have had threats or vulnerabilities that, we would probably have said, yeah, that's true too. Yeah. So, but it's really now this wave of blockchain-based solutions that maybe these folks aren't as familiar with. Insofar as Australia or other large democracies are concerned, I do think that there is a bit of a road still. It's hard to put a date on it. It's one of those things that we could see something happen from a process point of view that strikes the heart of democracy. Hey, actually, we need to make a change soon. Like Australia, actually, if you look at the AEC right now, they're actually undergoing a really big...
This is the Australian Electoral
Commission, is actually doing a big modernisation project, which is really great. The only problem is most of those systems are not moving towards internet voting. It's, a lot of the other architecture that they use, which is really, they're bringing it up to common standards, which is really great. And they're also forward looking and, saying, well, what might something in the future look like as well, which is great. But, again, political will needs to be there as well. And that's really hard to quantify. I mean, my hope would be that in the next 5 years, a lot of the liberal democracies are really looking towards blockchain-based digital voting systems.
So you reckon 5 years. So I can quote you to say, Nathan said, in 2018, by 2023, we'll have a full digital blockchain-based?
I would be surprised if, I don't know about Australia. I'm not going to say definitely Australia, but I would say European democracies and other, large liberal democracies where they exist, you will start to see at the very least the option. I'm not saying fully implemented. As I said, I think that's a much longer time scale, but certainly for any voter, it's got to be,
Well, I'm going to hold you to that, Nathan. In 5 years' time, I'll be sort of saying, Nathan, you said to me, and it's not happened because they've resisted all the time. But equally, as you say, I think if there's a major problem somewhere in the world, someone will say, shit, we need to do something. Sorry. We need to do something.
It's your podcast, Tim.
I know. I'll edit that out. Somebody will say, we really need to address this.
Yeah, as with all technology, it's really just going to take a handful of innovative governments to basically say, okay, we're going to explore this, demonstrate how well it works, and then you'll just have a cascading effect, and very quickly it'll become in vogue, and it'll sort of be, almost crazy not to have employed these systems. Once the cost benefits, the security benefits, the reliability and trust, all those things are demonstrated, then it becomes, a very quick snowball, I suspect. And, there are states, there are a few cases where this is happening already. The question is, how strong is the tech in those cases? But it's being trialed. It's not, we're not the only company pushing this kind of technology either. So It's coming.
Okay, so if people want to find out more about you, where do they find more information out about the secure voting system?
Yeah, so Secure.vote's website is secure.vote. Plenty of information on there. If you'd like to get in contact with us, I'm just Nathan at Secure.vote. Happy to hear from anyone interested in what we're doing.
Excellent. And the Flux Party as well? I mean...
Yeah. Flux Party is voteflux.org.
Right.
There's plenty of information on how to get involved with that movement. It's really exciting, actually. Lots happening on that side as well. So if you've got any skills you want to contribute to something that's non-partisan, I have to stress, if you're really looking to push a political agenda, Flux is not the organization for you. This is really about democracy itself. That's where we're trying to get to is how democracy works.
Nathan, look, it's been really fascinating talking to you. I know we could talk on for hours.
Yeah,
but,
definitely.
I think it's just so pertinent with what's happening with the midterms and that type of thing. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of feedback we get from people who listen to this. I mean, I wish you well with it. I mean, it just smells like a project that should succeed.
It's got to be. And like I said before, I mean, tech is really about making our lives simpler and easier and better. But it's getting to the very core of what it is to be in a society. Yeah, it is.
In a democratic society.
Yeah, and look, one of the other things I said is, democracy really is a pillar. It's a foundational thing. And if we can make some big strides forwards there, I mean, that's a huge impact thing. I mean, we've always said that we wanted to solve some problems that were going to be big impact, and we think this is definitely
democracy is ruling of the people, by the people, but supported by code. Is that the best way of doing it?
Tim, eventually everything will be supported by code.
Nathan, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Awesome.
So there you have it. There are so many reasons why digital voting could and should work to enable all of us to vote in our Jim Jams. Equally, using blockchain technology, we have an opportunity to get complete transparency on voting. Whilst at the same time, in difficult regimes, anonymous voting could become a reality. The reality of adoption, however, seems to be risk-driven. So perhaps we do need to look to smaller, more agile sovereign states like Malta and Estonia. They are more likely to have the flexibility to trial these blockchain-based solutions, to lead by example, and to show the rest of the world how powerful blockchain technology can be. As with so many blockchain technology solutions, only time will tell. In the next episode of Down the Rabbit Hole, we will be looking at how institutions are reacting to cryptocurrencies, both now and in the future. I will be talking with Heath Benke, a seasoned institutional investor who has seen both the institutional side of investment and the crazy ride of the cryptocurrency markets. We talk about how the institutional investors are looking at the market both now and in the future, and how they will adapt to the ever-changing environment. Will institutional investment appetite increase as security tokens become more prevalent? Find out more in the next episode as we continue on our journey down the rabbit hole.